The envelope was unremarkable. White, slightly creased at one corner, handwritten address in the careful lettering of someone who had taken their time with it. It arrived with 47 other pieces of fan mail on a Tuesday afternoon in October 2009, somewhere between Cleveland and Pittsburgh on the tour bus that had been Michael Bublé's primary residence for the better part of 3 months. His assistant, Karen, sorted the mail the way she always sorted it, setting aside the clearly professional correspondence, the gifts that needed photographing, and the letters that looked personal enough to warrant Michael's direct attention. The white envelope landed in the personal pile, not because anything about it appeared urgent, simply because something about the handwriting suggested that whoever had written it had chosen each word very carefully, and people who chose words carefully usually had something worth reading. Michael picked it up that evening, sometime after the show, still in the half-dress state that follows a 2-hour performance, jacket off, one cufflink in, the specific physical looseness of someone whose body has just finished something demanding. He opened it without particular anticipation. Fan mail was fan mail. He was grateful for it always, but the emotional register of reading it had become, after years of touring, something practiced rather than spontaneous. He read the first paragraph. Then he stopped. Then he read it again from the beginning, more slowly. And by the third paragraph, the cufflink was forgotten entirely. The jacket was on the floor, and Michael Bublé was sitting on the edge of a tour bus bunk at 11:30 at night, reading a letter from a man named James Calloway, and understanding with a clarity that hit like cold water that this was not ordinary fan mail. This was not someone describing how a song had soundtracked a happy memory. This was a man saying goodbye, and he had sent his goodbye to a stranger because the stranger had made something the man needed his daughter to have. James Calloway was 34 years old, a high school history teacher from Portland, Oregon, when he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in March 2009. The diagnosis arrived with the particular brutality that late-stage diagnoses carry, not as a possibility to be managed or a challenge to be overcome, but as a timeline. The doctors were kind and honest. They gave him months, not years. They told him to get his affairs in order, which is the medical profession's careful way of saying, decide what matters and spend the time you have left on those things. James had a wife, Rachel. They had been married for 6 years, the kind of marriage built on genuine friendship and sustained by two people who had chosen each other deliberately and continued choosing each other daily, without drama and without complacency, the way the best marriages work. Rachel was 5 months pregnant when James received the diagnosis. Their daughter, they had already decided on a name, Sophie, was due in August. James did the arithmetic that no father should have to do, standing in a hospital corridor in March, looking at a due date on a piece of paper and knowing with reasonable certainty that he would not be there to see her first birthday, that he might not see her first week. He did not collapse. People who knew James described him as someone who processed difficulty by going very quiet and very still, and then emerging after whatever internal reckoning had occurred with a plan. The plan took shape over several weeks of quiet evenings after Rachel had gone to sleep. James at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside him, thinking carefully about what he could leave behind for a daughter he would never fully know. He made a list. The practical things, letters for milestones she would reach without him, a video diary recorded while he still had the strength, a savings account. And then the impractical things, the specific way he hoped she would laugh, the qualities he hoped she would find in whoever she chose to love, the things you only understand by living through them and cannot transmit through letters but try to anyway, because trying is what love requires when the alternatives have run out. And then one evening in late September, he heard Michael Bublé's Haven't Met You Yet on the radio. He had heard it before. It was everywhere that year, inescapable in the way that certain songs become inescapable in certain seasons. But that evening in that kitchen, with the list on the table and the tea going cold, he heard it differently. He heard a man singing to someone he had not yet met, with complete certainty that the meeting was coming, with joy rather than anxiety at the prospect of love not yet arrived. And James Calloway thought, that is the song for Sophie. That is exactly what I want her to feel when she is ready to fall in love. Not fear, not guarding herself. That, exactly that. He sat down and wrote the letter. The letter was 4 pages, handwritten on notebook paper in the careful script of a man who had been a teacher long enough that legibility had become habit. James did not write as a fan. He wrote as a father. He explained who he was, what had happened, and what he was trying to do. He wrote about Sophie, the due date, the name, the way Rachel already talked to her bump as if she could hear and understand, which perhaps she could. He wrote about the song, not in the effusive language of someone writing to a celebrity, but in the direct language of a man explaining a decision he had made with full deliberation. He had decided that Haven't Met You Yet would be Sophie's song. Not in any official sense. He understood that was not how songs worked. But in the private sense that mattered more, he would ask Rachel to play it for Sophie from the beginning. When Sophie was old enough to ask why that song, Rachel would tell her about the evening in the kitchen and about the cold cup of tea and about the specific feeling the song had given him, the feeling that his daughter's life, the life he would not be present for, would still contain all the love it was supposed to contain, that the absence of his presence would not mean the absence of love, that the world would provide, in ways he could not predict or plan, what he could not provide himself. He asked Michael nothing. He made no requests. He did not ask for a signed photograph or a personal message or any of the things that fan letters typically ask for. He simply wanted Michael to know that his song had done something important on a specific evening in Portland, Oregon, and that it would continue to do something important for a girl who had not yet been born. He signed it James Calloway. Portland, Oregon. Father of Sophie, not yet arrived. Then he sealed it and sent it. He did not know if it would arrive. He did not know if it would be read among the hundreds of letters that a touring artist receives. He sent it the way you send things when you are running out of time, not because you are certain of the outcome, but because trying is more important than certainty, and because some things deserve to be said even when you cannot know if they will be heard. Michael read it twice on the tour bus and then put it down and did not pick it up again for several minutes. His road manager, Derek, who had been doing scheduling work in the front section, noticed the silence from the back of the bus, a different quality of silence from the post, show quiet Michael usually carried, something heavier and more still, and came back to check. Michael handed him the letter without saying anything. Derek read it. Then he was also quiet for a moment. We need to find this man, Michael said. I'll reach out to management in the morning, Derek said. Tonight, Michael said. If we can. They could not that night. The management offices were closed. The address on the letter was a home address in Portland with no phone number, and the tour was moving east. But Derek made the calls first thing the following morning, tracking the letter back through the management chain to confirm it had arrived legitimately, and then attempting to locate James Calloway through the address provided. The response came back that afternoon while the tour bus was somewhere in Pennsylvania with the gray autumn landscape moving past the windows. James Calloway had passed away 3 days before Michael read the letter. He had died at home with Rachel beside him on a Saturday morning in early October. Sophie had been born 6 weeks earlier in late August, and James had held her. That mattered enormously. That was the thing Michael came back to, sitting with the information in the moving bus. James had held her. She had grabbed his finger with the complete grip that newborns use, as if she already understood that holding on was the right response to everything. And James had looked at his daughter, and whatever he found there had been sufficient, because by every account he had been at peace from that moment forward, in a way that people around him described as something they had not seen before and could not entirely explain. Michael sat with this for a long time. The show was in 7 hours. 22 dates remained on the tour. None of that was the thing he was thinking about. The tour continued. There were contracts involving venues and crews and opening acts and the livelihoods of dozens of people who had nothing to do with James Calloway's letter. Michael went back on stage the night after he learned what had happened in a theater in Philadelphia, and he performed. Those backstage that night noticed something different. Not in the performance itself, which was warm and received the standing ovation that Michael Bublé performances reliably received. Something in the preparation. Michael was quieter than usual before walking out. He stood in the wings longer, with a quality of stillness that his band recognized as different from the focused calm he typically carried into a show. And when he sang, Haven't Met You Yet, placed third from the end of the set, He sang it with a quality that several musicians on stage later tried to describe and found difficult to articulate precisely. It was not sadder than usual. It was not more obviously emotional in the performative sense. It was something more interior, a quality of directness, as if the song had acquired a specific address that it had not previously had, as if he was no longer singing to a general feeling or a general audience, but to someone specific, about something specific, and the specificity had given the song a weight it simply could not have carried when it was still, in the full sense, just a song. The drummer, Pete, said later that it was like the difference between a rehearsal and a real performance. The notes were identical, but the room felt different, the way rooms feel different when the person in them is actually present rather than technically present. That quality arrived in Philadelphia and did not leave for the remaining 21 dates. Michael did not tell the audiences about James. He did not dedicate the song publicly. He simply carried the letter, the way you carry private things in public, present in everything without being visible in anything specific, shaping everything from beneath the surface. Rachel Calloway received a letter 3 weeks after James died. It arrived forwarded through Michael's management on official stationery with a handwritten note inside. Michael had written it himself, not through a publicist, not drafted by an assistant. He told Rachel that he had received James's letter and read it. He told her it had affected him in ways he was still trying to understand. He told her about the shows that followed, not in detail, but enough. He told her that he had thought about James every night for the rest of the tour when that song came around in the set. He said that he hoped Sophie was well. He said that he hoped Rachel was finding, in the middle of the grief that must be everywhere, some moments that were simply about the baby, simply about the extraordinary, ordinary fact of a new person in the world. He said that James had clearly been someone who loved with great precision and great generosity, and that the letter he had written was proof of something worth knowing, that even the things we cannot finish, we can still begin, and the beginning can be enough. He did not include contact information. He offered nothing except the letter itself, which was the correct amount to offer to someone in the middle of grief. Not a solution, not an ongoing relationship, but the simple acknowledgement that what had happened had mattered to someone else too. Rachel kept it in the same box where she kept James's letters to Sophie, the ones written for milestones, the graduation letter, the wedding letter, the one titled simply, "For when you need to know you are loved." Michael's letter lived alongside them. It was not James's, but it was evidence of the same thing James had believed, that music made between strangers could carry something real, and that the real thing inside it could travel further than anyone involved in making it had anticipated or intended. Sophie Calloway grew up in Portland, Oregon, raised by Rachel and surrounded by the particular love that forms around a child who has been consciously, deliberately treasured from before she was born. She grew up knowing about her father, not as an absence, but as a presence, through Rachel's stories and James's video diary and the letters that arrived at milestone moments, as if he had found a way to keep being present despite everything. She grew up with music the way children grow up with it when their parents understand it as language rather than entertainment. Rachel played James's favorites, the records he had loved. She played her own, and she played from Sophie's earliest months, "Haven't Met You Yet," the way James had asked, not constantly but regularly woven into the ordinary texture of their home. Sophie did not know the full story until she was 12. Rachel sat her down and told her about the evening in the kitchen and the cold cup of tea and the letter her father had written to a stranger. She showed her both letters, James's draft, which she had found in his desk after he died, and Michael's reply. Sophie read them slowly, taking her time, choosing her attention carefully in the way Rachel had always recognized as her father's habit, inherited without being taught. When she finished, she went very quiet. Then she asked if she could hear the song. Rachel played it, and Sophie, 12 years old, sat in the same kitchen where her father had sat on a September evening 15 years before, listening to a man sing to someone he had not yet met, and understood for the first time what the song had meant to her father and what it was still doing, still carrying, still delivering all these years later. She wrote to Michael, a short letter carefully handwritten explaining who she was. She asked for nothing. She simply wanted him to know that the song had arrived, that it had done what her father needed it to do, that James Calloway's daughter was real and well and growing up in Portland, Oregon, and that the love her father had sent forward through a stranger's music had found her. Michael received Sophie's letter in 2022 and read it before a show in Seattle, close enough to Portland that the connection was not lost on him. He called Rachel that evening. They talked for 40 minutes, the first time they had spoken directly despite being connected by letters for more than a decade. At the end of the call, Michael asked if Sophie would like to come to a show, not as a backstage guest, but to stand on stage during Haven't Met You Yet, not to perform. Just to be present beside the song so the song could finally know who it had been waiting for all this time. Rachel said she would ask. Sophie said yes. Michael arranged the Portland date specifically. He moved the schedule because it needed to be Portland, the city where James had heard the song, where Sophie had grown up, where the cold cup of tea had sat on a kitchen table in September 2009 and a father had made a decision about his daughter's future, the only city where the story could arrive properly. Sophie Calloway was 14 when she stood in the wings of a Portland concert hall in a plain blue dress, listening to several thousand people who had come to hear Michael Bublé and had no idea what was about to happen. Rachel stood beside her, holding her hand. They had talked on the way to the venue about James, about the kitchen table, about the letter, about what it means to receive something from someone who is gone, carried to you through other people's care across years you did not yet exist to remember. When Michael reached Haven't Met You Yet, he stopped before the opening notes and spoke to the audience. He told them about James Calloway, the history teacher, the father, the cold cup of tea on a September evening in Portland. He told them what James had wanted the song to do. He told them about Rachel. He did not rush the telling. He gave each part the time it deserved. Then he said James Calloway's daughter is here tonight. Her name is Sophie. And he gestured toward the wings. Sophie walked out. The audience, completely silent through the telling, broke into the kind of applause that is not performance, but pure response, the sound of thousands of people recognizing something true when they see it and needing to say so with everything they have. Michael took Sophie's hand and walked her to center stage. He crouched to her height and said something that only she could hear. Whatever it was made her smile, quick and involuntary, the smile of someone who did not mean to smile yet and could not help it. Then the band began to play. Michael sang Haven't Met You Yet, with Sophie standing beside him, her hand in his, both of them facing the audience. He did not ask her to sing. He did not hand her a microphone or ask her to perform in any way. He simply sang the song her father had chosen for her, in the city where her father had chosen it, with her present to receive it at last. Rachel, in the front row, was crying before the first chorus. Around her, people who had never heard of James Calloway before that evening were crying too, not from sadness exactly, but from the specific emotion that arrives when something crosses the distance it was supposed to cross. When a thing that was sent actually arrives. When love that was intended actually lands years after the person who sent it is gone. Sophie stood on that stage for the entirety of the song, still, in the way her father had apparently been still when something mattered, present in the complete way he had always been present. When it ended and the applause came, she looked out at the audience with an expression that Rachel would later describe as James's expression exactly, the look of someone who has just understood something important and is sitting very quietly with the understanding before doing anything else with it. Afterward, Michael sat with Sophie and Rachel backstage for an hour. They talked about James the way you talk about people who are gone but still present, with the mixture of grief and gratitude, and sometimes laughter that belongs to love that does not end when the person ends. Michael asked Sophie what she wanted to be when she grew up. Teaching, she told him, like her father. He nodded as if this was exactly the right answer, which perhaps it was. James Calloway wrote a letter to tell Michael Bublé that a song had done something important on a September evening in Portland. He sent it knowing he would probably not live to know if it was received. He sent it as a final act of a man who had spent his life believing that the things we give freely, attention, love, music, words on paper, travel further than we can track and arrive in places we will never see. He was right. The song found Sophie. Not only through Rachel playing it at home across her childhood, though that too, but through a chain of care and correspondence and attention that ran from a tour bus in Pennsylvania in 2009 to a concert stage in Portland in 2023, carried forward by people who understood that certain things deserve to be delivered properly, and that the delivery itself is part of what the thing means. Michael Bublé has sung Haven't Met You Yet thousands of times. He will sing it thousands more. But there is a version of that song that exists in a register no recording captures. The version that carries James Calloway's name and Rachel's grief, and Sophie's absolute stillness on a Portland stage 14 years after a father sat at a kitchen table and decided his daughter deserved to feel, whenever she was ready, that love was coming toward her and not away. The version that knows exactly who it was for, even though it was written before Sophie existed, before James's diagnosis, before any of the circumstances that would eventually give it its most precise and most permanent meaning. Music moves forward without knowing where it is going. Sometimes, if the people carrying it are careful enough, it arrives exactly where it was needed. And sometimes, years later, the person it was needed for stands on a stage in the right city and receives it from the hands of the person who made it. And the love that was sent forward through strangers and letters in time finally completes the journey it was always trying to make. James Calloway knew the song was Sophie's, he just could not deliver it himself. So he sent it forward in a letter to a stranger who turned out to be exactly the right person to carry it the rest of the way. That is what music can do when the people involved in it understand what it is actually for